Hello everyone, it's a beautiful Saturday morning, and in this monologue I'm going to talk about why I support America's involvement in Israel's war with Iran, while I do not support America's involvement in the Ukraine-Russia war. So, in order to understand this, the first thing we need to address is the origin and purpose of this conflict, like what the objective was in this conflict in the first place. Let's take America out of the picture for a moment and just see what is this dispute all about. So starting with the older one, the Ukraine-Russia conflict, which precedes the Iran-Israel one, that is rooted in communism. So communism, as we well know, it's a little over a century old, at least in its political form, in its successful political form. 1917 is the Russian Revolution. And at the time, there was some activism in America as well, and in other Western countries, but it was not successful in those countries. Indeed, not only was it not successful, but in America in particular, there was a huge backlash, a reaction to it. And there was, of course, this persecution of communists. There was the Red Scare right after World War I in the 20s, in the early 20s. And then after World War II, there was McCarthyism, of course. Bottom line is, don't want to go into too many details because it's not really relevant. The point that I'm making here is that communism was considered a very pernicious and dangerous idea in America. And America went to great lengths to suppress it, to fight it. Now, it's very important to understand this. I'm not here to litigate the past. Okay, it's totally not up to me. This is just such a complex and comprehensive subject. And I'm in general, as a historian, I did major in history in college. As a historian, I'm very leery and circumspect about people trying to speculate as to what would have happened or how things could have been differently 200 years ago. Okay, it's water under the bridge at this point. So at this point, we have to assume that if our ancestors did it, it was the right thing. We just have to operate on that assumption, because if you don't, then the sky is the limit as to what you can possibly hypothesize and talk about. You're not grounded in any reality. So in order to be grounded in reality, you have to take it for granted that the fight against communism was just and proper, and that's the reality. That's what happened in American history. And so again, we're taking it for granted that this was a proper fight. That what America did against communism, including all the vast and complicated apparatus in American foreign policy, the Marshall Plan, for example. Realize the Marshall Plan was meant to thwart communism. Make no mistake about it, okay? That was the reason why America spent money, a lot of money, to rebuild Europe, is because if America wouldn't do so, then it would fall into Russia. That was the idea. But anyway, point being here is, one of the aspects of that fight against communism was the organization called NATO. NATO was meant to actually defend, it was a mutual defense pact for countries who resisted communism, meaning they were capitalist countries, liberal democracies like ours. And America was, of course, the leading member of NATO, even though they were not on that side of the Atlantic. But America was a member of the NATO and was invested in it, of course, in its fight against communism. And what happened, so now we're finally getting to the Ukraine-Russia conflict. So what happened is, Ukraine wanted to join NATO. So I don't know the exact year when it was trying to do so, but obviously relatively recently, okay? So Ukraine used to be, before the dissolution of the USSR, Ukraine was of course part of the Soviet Union. So it wasn't part of NATO, it was part of the communist coalition. And but in the subsequent decades, after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, as many other former USSR countries have done, they have drifted and gravitated towards the West. It's almost always you'll have a stronger economy, more liberties, more comforts, and it's just better, right? So I don't blame them for it. I'm very sympathetic for that. But keep in mind that that's not really what NATO was all about. NATO was not here to poach members from former Soviet Union. And more importantly, the reason I'm so critical of that, I am not supportive of the Ukraine-Russia conflict, is that the entire concept of communism has been refuted. Okay, communism has almost no viable manifestation in the modern time. Russia is not communist. I mean, there's oligarchs there, but it's basically a free market. Even China, people don't know this. There's a Chinese Communist Party, but China is not run as a communist. The economy is not communist at all. Okay, I don't want to go into details, but believe me, it is not a communist economy. Right? There's plenty of private practice there. Yes, you do have to satisfy, state wishes, but you get to keep the profits. Okay, and you get to do whatever you want in terms of innovation. They're never going to put their thumbs down and say, "Oh, you can't do this," because the state determines, production quotas, etc., like it is in a true communist regime. So, point is, communism is a refuted idea. So the whole raison d'être of NATO doesn't exist. And so what I'm asking is a very simple question. Why should we help Ukraine join NATO away from away from Russia? For what purpose? There is no communism. What are we fighting here? Whom are we fighting? Russia's not a bad guy anymore. So now I know the real answer to this. You know what? I will tell you the real answer. I was going to say, I'm digressing, but I will tell you the real answer just so you understand that I'm not just saying that that's not the case, but I also know what the real answer is as well. The real answer is that it is essentially an association against Russia's influence. So not communist influence. It has nothing to do with Russia being a communist country or even a former communist country. It's just basically Russia is a pretty powerful economy. It controls vast expanses of land, okay, and so essentially it is an association of countries in Europe that have a certain culture and a certain agenda, and it's basically saying, hey, this is us and this is you, so you can be with us, you can be with them. Which economy do you want to be with? Has nothing to do with communism. It's just basically it's either us or it's just like there's America and Mexico. Mexico isn't any more communist than America, but there's different countries, right? They have different cultures and different polities and so on and so forth. It's the same thing here. But this has nothing to do with America's interests. That's the point that I'm trying to make. So this is something, at the very best, it's a European versus Asian thing, right? Russia being technically, at least east of the Ural Mountains is Asia. And then you have, of course, the West, which includes basically the European Union. So this is a European Union versus Russia thing. Okay, that's really what it is. So NATO shouldn't even be involved here, because the purpose of NATO is to thwart communism, not to be involved in regional economic rivalries. And so America should not be involved in this at all. So let's dispense with that. Now we're going to address the Iran-Israel rivalry. So that one is rooted in a concept called Islamism. So Islamism, also known as jihadism. So Islamism is when Arab countries, Muslim countries, they decide to enshrine Sharia law in the government. So Sharia law is sanctioned by the government. It forces everyone to behave in a certain way. And so it's a pretty radical and fundamentalist way of governing its subjects. It's unheard of in the West, okay? There is no Western country, there's no democracy in Europe or in America or anywhere that forces people to conform to any religion, right? At least not in modern times. Yeah, of course, there was, after the Protestant-Catholic wars in the 17th century, there was, at some point, there was an agreement that people have to follow the religion of the local ruler. But we're long past that. Okay, at this point, we are liberal democracies. Liberal, by definition, means that our subjects have the liberty to do whatever they want in the religious realm and in the economic realm, of course, and the social, etc. So the point is, this is a culture that is very much divergent and antithetical to Western sensibilities. So keep that in mind. Plus, it's not even our religion, because the West is mostly Judeo-Christian. Okay? So this is clearly a threat to America. I'm not the one saying so. our culture sees it that way, but they themselves, they meaning the people who support Sharia, these Islamists, they see America that way. They see America as an enemy. So, to wit, following the Iranian Revolution, 1978, when the Shah, who had been supported by America, was deposed, they started chanting "Death to America." This was spontaneous. The Iranians rising up, deposing the American-supported puppet regime, supposedly the Shah. They're saying now, no, we don't want that. We want an Islamist government and death to America. We hate America. America is the devil. Okay? Didn't start with anti-Israel. This is very important. I'll get to this in a moment. It started anti-America. Okay? So in 1978, its original battle cry, right, wasn't against Israel. It was against America. Now, of course, later there was the little Satan and the big Satan. Okay, the big Satan is America. Little Satan, I don't know which one is which. Point is, they're both evil. But the way Iran sees it, and this is a very important thing to understand, the way Iran sees it, Iran sees the Western culture in general as evil, okay? And it sees Israel as an outpost of the Western culture on its doorstep. Of course, it's not on its doorstep, but it's in traditionally Muslim region, right? So all of that used to be Muslim until the 20th century, including Palestine, Egypt, the Levant. All of that was Muslim. Now, there was, of course, there's a complicated thing about Lebanon. There still is a sizable Christian minority there. So we're going to leave that aside. But other than that, it's essentially all Muslim. Okay, the Ottoman Turks was a Muslim empire. Okay, they're not the same stock as the Iranians, of course. There's Persians, there's Turks, there's Arabs, there's different ethnicities, but they were Muslim. And so the way an Islamist country sees it is that, and this is very important in Islam, you're not allowed to cede any ground. And it's actually a holy war to both maintain and to reclaim land that is lost. So the Iranian ideology is very much against Israel on a religious basis. It believes in that. It believes that it is its religious duty to fight Israel because Israel is a manifestation of heretical interest, of a heretical polity in what was formerly Muslim land. And so it is its obligation to uproot that and to fight it until it's defeated. And so that's what's happening here. So the question is, why should America get involved in this? And the answer is, unlike communism, this is an active, pernicious idea. It's active. I mean, think about all the recent terrorist incidents against America and other Western interests. Get back to this in a moment, why we should care about other Western interests. But about all these others, think about, of course, there's domestic incidents here, people, shooters, active shooters, etc. But I'm talking about organized things coming from, from traditional terrorists. These are almost all of them are Muslims. Okay, Timothy McVeigh is the only exception. I mean, how many hijacking? When you hear of a hijacking of a plane, what do you think? You think of a Muslim terrorist, right? You think of an Islamist, a jihadist. That's what you're thinking. And that's how it all started. The whole concept of terrorism started from that angle, from jihadist attacks against Westerners in the name of Islam. And so this is an active threat. It is active in America, okay, and of course in other Western countries. Now, it used to come from other elements within Muslim society, but in recent years, and America is partially at fault at this, and we'll get back to this in a moment, but in recent years, Iran has been the major sponsor of terrorism. Now, why is America partially at fault? The Iraq War was a huge mistake. Huge mistake. I'll get back to this in a moment too. Oh my gosh, I have so many things to get back to. But suffice it to say for a moment that one of the effects of this ill-begotten war, this is like literally the mistake of the century. It's hard to imagine America making a bigger mistake than the 2005 invasion of Iraq. But anyway, one of the ill effects of that war is that it actually strengthened Iran. Because keep in mind that Saddam Hussein was a secular Sunni ruler. And he was a counterweight to Shiite Iran. So by eliminating him, guess what happened to Iraq? Iraq is now just the playground of Iran. Okay? Iraq is now ruled by a Shiite government that is allied with Iran. And there's essentially the militias in Iraq that are beholden to the mullahs of Iran. They're doing their bidding. They're taking orders, okay, not literal orders, but they're essentially following the wishes of the mullahs in Iran. So while unofficially it's a separate country, it's actually being influenced and guided by the mullahs in Iran. So essentially what America did is take power away from someone who happened, they did an offense by invading Kuwait in 1991, but basically not much more than that. So you deposed them and you invested trillions of dollars in the process, and instead you gave the power to arguably an even greater threat in the form of jihadist Iran. So that's part of it. But suffice it to say that's what the status quo is right now. The fact of the matter is that the biggest source of terrorism, of jihadist terrorism nowadays, is from Iran. Now, there used to be, of course, ISIS, but that came from a completely different angle, I'll admit. It had nothing to do with Iran. ISIS was, of course, a Sunni movement. Al-Qaeda is a Sunni movement. So we're not going to get into that. ISIS is defeated, so that's out of the way. Right now, what we have, in fact, Syria, which is an offshoot of ISIS, the modern Syria, as of 3 months ago, has explicitly said, no, we're not fighting Israel, we're not doing any of that. And they're keeping a tight grip on what's going on there. They just don't want anything to do with fighting Israel or the West or anything. So they've completely renounced that. So Iran is the only one within the Muslim world that is actively fighting the West. So now we've established that this is an active threat. It is clearly against our interests. It's not like communism that is long gone. It's something that's active and it's going on. So now the question is, I'm trying to crawl into the minds of, Tucker Carlson. Okay, he's the major proponent, the biggest proponent of isolationism at this point, right? He's trying to push the Trump regime, the Trump administration, which he's supported, of course, but he's basically part of the MAGA component that is saying, no, we should not get involved with Iran. It's not our business to be there. And the argument, so I'm going to give Tucker Carlson's argument, and I'm going to refute it. So what Tucker Carlson is saying is that Iran hasn't attacked us, right? So why should we get in? Like, they're wrong, they're bad, but it's not our job. We're not the world's police. Okay, they haven't attacked us, and so we shouldn't be attacking them. So he's an isolationist, non-interventionist. We shouldn't be doing this. So he draws the same thing, same conclusion from the war against Russia, right? From our fight against Russia and from our former fight against the Iraqis, against Saddam Hussein. He's saying the same thing applies here. We shouldn't have fought them. We shouldn't be fighting Ukraine, and we shouldn't be fighting against Iran. Okay. Now the reason he's wrong is because, again, those are not active threats. Communism is not an active threat. Iraq was never an active threat. Realize this. Iraq was a mistake from day one. It's not just a mistake in retrospect. From day one, when they claimed that there was WMDs in Iraq, that all was a lie. I oppose this. I'm not being revisionist here. I opposed the Iraq war in 2004, 2003. When it happened, I was already saying, Bush, you're crazy. You're listening to Dick Cheney. Dick Cheney was the engineer of that war. And he's a war criminal. He should be prosecuted, and he should have been. In a normal world, he would go to jail for life for what he did, because he knew, or should have known, that the premise of the Iraq war was completely flawed. There were no WMDs at the time. This is very different from Iran. In Iran, we know with absolute certainty that Iran is enriching uranium beyond 60%, which is far more than what is needed for civilian purposes. That's a fact. That's not in dispute. I invite Tucker Carlson or Candace Owens or anyone else to sit around me here and debate me on this, because they'll lose this debate any time of the day. If you think that they're not doing so, if you're factually disputing me on this, you're in la-la land, okay? Now, the question arises, of course, what purpose does Iraq have? Iraq is saying, officially, we're not doing an atomic weapon, okay? We're not using that. Of course, Israeli intelligence and American intelligence indicates otherwise, but yeah, they haven't done it yet, technically, as far as we know. They're on the cusp of getting it, but they haven't quite achieved an atomic weapon. But we also know for a fact that they're enriching uranium very rapidly, and again, it has no other purpose than for military reasons. It's not for civilian reasons. And so the question here is, this is very different from Iraq. In Iraq, you had a relatively rationalist ruler. Okay, this is not a jihadist guy. This is a guy, a secular ruler that, and as we all know, secular rulers tend to have a lot more in common with America than we might at first blush admit. Like, for example, we avoided a hot war with Russia because they were rational, secular people, right? And, of course, it was called MAD, mutually assured destruction. And so, could the same have been said if Russia were a crazy regime guided by some type of mythical religious fundamentalist basis? Maybe not. Maybe it would have erupted into a hot war, right? But the reason it remained a Cold War is because Russia had the sense of not doing anything to escalate, as America did as well, because they were both rational and they both realized that if I pull the trigger, my opponent will too. Can the same thing said about Islamists? I don't think so. I really don't. And again, I challenge those who are being Iran apologists and those who think that we shouldn't intervene. I challenge them to debate me on this. Okay, realize that under Islamist ideals, okay, this world doesn't matter. This world is temporary. The world to come is what matters. And if God wants me to do such and such in this world, even if it results in destruction, that not only isn't that a bad thing, sometimes it's actually a good thing. Because this doesn't matter. It just makes the world a better place in terms of what God's will is. And I can die in the process. It doesn't matter because I'm going to get 70 virgins in the world to come. And I mean, if you don't take this ideology seriously, I think you're mistaken. I mean, Iran has been preaching this for a long time. Death to America, death to this. They have acted on it. And here's the most important thing, I think, at least in my mind, that makes me, that sways me in the direction of anti-Iran. And that is October 7. So October 7 has demonstrated that it's not purely abstract. Okay, we all are aware of certain cultures that state certain things in their catechism, right? But they're not going to act upon it, right? So that's a common phenomenon. I'm going to give you a personal one, because I grew up ultra-Orthodox, and in my religion, there is actually a commandment in the Torah, one of the 613 commandments in the Bible, is to annihilate and exterminate the Amalekites. And I always used to think, when I used to be, there's no conditions on this. There's no get out of jail free card. There's no converting. There's no apologizing. There's no expiating your sins. You must be exterminated. Okay? In fact, God was very mad at Saul because he commanded him to fight the Amalekites, and he sustained the animals. He didn't kill all of them. And that was a major sin against Saul, according to the Bible. Anyway, so I used to think when I was religious and when I grew up, I used to think to myself, okay, what would happen if we would have, this is a theoretical question, what would happen if we have a verified, genetically verified person who is 100% pure Amalekite? So I would literally have to take a gun, a sword, whatever, make a blessing and say, God has commanded me to kill the Amalekite, pull the trigger, and then I just fulfill the commandment. And what would happen if this goes to court, for example? I would say, hey, freedom of religion, right? This is my religion commands me to do so. Okay? So the point being here is that as it happens, while the ultra-Orthodox in America are very keen about preserving their own cultures and traditions, they do not interfere with other people's rights. So this is an important thing. So they'll proclaim these things, but it's all abstract. Nobody, okay, I entertain, I'm just relating to you what I thought in my mind, but of course I didn't actually seriously consider acting upon it. Not that it was relevant, and it could have possibly been relevant because there would never ever be confirmed anyone to be 100% Amalekite through DNA testing or anything like that. But anyway, the point that I'm making here is that sometimes people preach certain things that are not applicable. But with Iran, what October 7 has demonstrated is that they're willing to act upon it. Make no mistake, Hamas was 100% a proxy, a messenger of Iran. Hamas would never have been in the position to launch that attack without Iran's blessing, without Iran's support, morally, financially, and religiously, in every way and form, and ideologically. And so basically, Iran acted upon it. And so this really, before October 7, I might have been persuaded to say, you know what, Iran is bluffing. Okay, I might have been persuaded to say, let them have that nuclear weapon. They're never going to use it. But in October 7, we have seen what they are actually willing to do. Not theoretically, actually. Okay? And so, the fact that they're doing it by proxy doesn't absolve them at all. Okay, this is just a strategic way of getting away with it. Hey, I didn't do it. Attack them. Don't attack me, right? That's the scapegoat, right? But you're 100% responsible for this. You're the one who financed them, and you're the one who gave them everything. So, and so again, we have seen that Iran is willing to do this. And so Iran is a threat to the West. Now, again, the final question that I need to address that Candace Owens / Tucker Carlson will pose to me is, it's only Israel. Israel is a threat from Iran, but not us. Okay? Why should we Americans pay for Israel's war? And the answer is like this. Listen, I'm going to tell you this. Okay, I'm going to be honest with you. If you believe that America's involvement in World War I and World War II was an error, if you think that shouldn't have been done, then I'm going to be very inclined to agree with you. It's still not a perfect analogy because Iran has in fact attacked us in some way. But then again, in World War II also, Germany also attacked our merchant vessels, etc. But regardless, listen, if you're going to oppose intervention and you also believe that World War I and World War II was a mistake, and you probably would have to argue that the Civil War was also a mistake, right? Because in that case, why did we have to intervene with the South? Let the South secede and do their own thing, and they're wrong, right? They're wrong to maintain slavery, but it's not our job to fix them, right? I mean, this logic could be extended could and should be extended in order to be consistent to all these other wars as well. And like I indicated earlier, we can't be revisionist about our interpretation of history. We can't just accept all of these historical episodes of the past and then say, oh, now we should do something different, because that's just not the world we live in. We did, in fact, fight the Civil War. We did, in fact, fight World War I, World War II, Vietnam, all those other things. And by the way, even the war against communism, the communists never attacked us on our own soil. So you would also have to be against that too. Okay, let the entire world go to communist hell. Let them take over. You would have to be against the Marshall Plan too. Let Germany and France fall to the communists. I mean, we have a huge ocean that separates us, right? So all we have to care about is our continent, maybe our neighbors, Mexico, but the Marshall Plan should not have applied to Europe, right? According to your logic. So why that? So again, what I'm trying to illustrate here to you is that you can take a real activist threat that is clearly against our interests, but it's not against us. Okay? It's against our values, but it's not against us. I personally am safe. And say, oh, we should definitely not get involved at all. Okay, now, the last thing I want to mention is the amount of involvement. Okay, so here's the last thing that Tucker Carlson would tell me. Okay, sure, okay, you persuaded me. We should get involved in the war, but minimally involved. We shouldn't do an invasion. We shouldn't commit trillions of dollars. We shouldn't do a regime change like we did in Iraq, etc. And finally, I agree with you. I agree with you. So here's the other thing, the other mistake that I think Carlson is making. I think Carlson is extrapolating from the Iraq War, because the Iraq War was such a heinous and unmitigated mistake that he's kind of overlearning the lesson from it, and he's extrapolating from it, and he's essentially presuming that we're doing here the same thing that we did there. But it's not the same. The proposal right now in front of America is not whether to launch a regime change, a ground operation in Iran. That is not at all what's being considered here. The question is whether to bomb Fordo. Now, would Iran retaliate? Yes. Okay, now that's true. I'm not going to, there could be an escalation. I'm not going to negate that. But the action that we are proposing is not at all the same of what we proposed and what we actually did in Iraq in 2003. Okay? So there is no regime change planned here. Of course, it would be nice if the Ayatollah falls, but that's not the goal. The goal is to prevent them from having a nuclear weapon. And it is relatively easy and cheap to do so. All you need to do is to have the powerful enough bombs to penetrate any and every site in Iran that is involved in the enrichment of uranium, beyond the civilian levels that are legit. Okay? And so here we're not doing that much. Again, it does risk Iran escalating it, but if it's, you can't just be afraid. What cop approaches their job this way? Hey, if I launch a pursuit, somebody is trying to run away from me, therefore something might happen. Okay, if that something happens, that's on them, not on me. Okay, so again, if the action itself is justified, we can't refrain from doing it just because, what will Iran do in response? Okay, so we have to think of ourselves, hey, is Iran threatening our interests? Is Iran threatening our values? If so, what is the response that we are proposing? What is the action that we're proposing? And yes, it is quite minimal. It is quite minimal. There's no ground invasion. There is no way that this is a slippery slope for involvement to the tunes of tens of billions, let alone hundreds of billions. It just isn't. Because remember, in Iraq in 2003, the proposal was regime change. The proposal was to topple Iraq. And the big mistake in that war is not just that it wasn't justified on its merits, but that there wasn't any realistic plan on what the post-Iraq regime would look like. And there should have been. But there was no accounting, there was no reckoning. And in fact, the people in the administration who brought up this issue, they were quickly sidelined and fired. I don't want to get sidetracked with that whole story, but that's the reality. Study it. Okay? But in this case, there is no such proposal. There is no deception. There is no there's no skullduggery on the part of the administration, the administration's possible plan to bomb Fordo, for example. It's very simple, very straightforward. There's no hidden agenda here. All we're doing is we are eliminating the nuclear weapons threat from Iran. Okay, and let me go back to what I said earlier. This is not a speculation that they have WMDs like it was with Iraq. And a deceptive one at that, because the administration really knew that they didn't have. There was no evidence that they had chemicals. He had actually destroyed it. And this was confirmed, of course, after the war, when they actually searched all the different sites and they just couldn't fake it, and they had to admit it, there was nothing found. But in this case, we know, I can't reiterate this more, I can't emphasize this more. We know for a fact that Iran is enriching uranium to a very high level that has no purpose for civilian use. Okay? So I hope I addressed all the concerns and all the possible objections that I can get from these isolationists. And you're welcome to debate me. Thank you. Bye.